Now we are going to talk about the last section, or the last topic of 7.1. So this section, we are going to take all the tools that we learned in section 1 and 2, and we're going to combine them and use them for section 3. So example 1, we want to solve the quadratic equation by completing the square. And if there's more than one solution, separate them with commas. For example 1, we are given x squared minus 16x plus 54 is equal to 0. So we are going to follow the steps up here. So step 1, right? So I guess before we do the steps, let's talk about a, b, and c first. Right? Recall, it's going to be ax squared plus bx plus c equal to 0. So a is 1, b is negative 16, and c is 54. The first step, we want to divide both sides by a to make the leading coefficient 1. Right? Actually, sorry guys. So let's talk about, how do I know to use completing the square? So the very first thing, before we do any of these steps at all, is we always want to see, are there two numbers that multiply to be 54 and add to be negative 16, right? And so we would take this, so because it's positive, and then we have a negative b, we know that both numbers should be negative, right? So let's see, what are the factors of 54? There is 1 and 54, but when I add them, they don't give me negative 16. There's 2 and 27, they also don't give me negative 16. I have, let's see, 3 goes in there 18 times, but 3 plus 18, that is not, it doesn't equal 16. And then, let's see, 4 doesn't go in there, 5 doesn't go in there, and then there's 6 and 9, right? But 6 plus 9, that is not 16. So, and these are all the factors of 54. So since none of the factors of 54 add to be negative 16, we know we will have to complete the square. But when we do problems like this, you should always check this first, because this would save you a lot more time. So because it doesn't work, we have to complete the square. So first things first, step 1, we need to divide both sides by a to make the leading coefficient 1. But lucky for us, the leading coefficient is already 1. So step 1 is done. Step 2, we want to isolate the variable terms on one side of the equation, right? So essentially, from looking at example 2, you kind of just want to make it like x squared plus minus 16x plus just a blank. Okay, and then this can equal to anything. So over here, we're going to subtract 54 from both sides. Okay, equal to 54. And now our goal is to find a new c, so we can factor this into a perfect square. So step 3, we are now going to complete the square. So this is step 3. This can be like little side work. So this is negative 16 over 2 quantity squared. And so negative 16 times 2 is negative 8, and negative 8 squared is 64, right? So that was the first step of step 3, and then now, that was part of the first step, and now we want to add 64 to both sides. So we are going to add 64 to both sides. Right? And actually, maybe to be more clear, I will do this on another line. So we get x squared minus 16x So actually, sorry, let me take another step back. So why are we adding 64 to both sides? Because when you add 64 to one side, so it's like a seesaw, everything like we've done before, you do something to one side, you have to even it out or you have to balance it out by adding it to the other side, right? Another way to think about it is you are adding by 0, so it's going to be like plus 64 minus 64 is equal to 54, right? And then when you add 64 to both sides, you'll still get 54 plus 64, right? So those are just a couple of ways to think about it. So just whatever helps you remember, right? So now let's look at this. So we want to factor the resulting perfect square trinomial. So if we had done this right, this should be a perfect square trinomial. And we did. This is x minus 8 quantity squared. Okay, and then we can do like kind of a double check. So x times x is x squared. Negative 8 times negative 8 is 64. 2 times x times negative 8, that is negative 16x. So this is the exact same as above. And then what is 54 plus 64? That is 118. Right? So now that we've completed a square, now we're going to use the square root property. And what does the square root property state? If we have x squared, or like a box squared, equal to a number, then we can do whatever's inside the squared, which is x minus 8. And then that is equal to plus or minus the square root of 118. Right? So now, we can either add 8 to both sides, or we can simplify the square root. Since the previous example, I simplified it first, I'll go ahead and just add this first now, so you can see it doesn't matter, right? So add 8 to both sides, I get 8 plus or minus the square root of 118. And then I'm going to do some work. So if I have 118, so 2, that is 52 and 56. And this is 2 and 28. This is 2 and 14, 2 and 7. So 118 is also 2 to the 4th times 7. Because we have a power greater than our index, that means this 2 to the 4th can be simplified even more. So how are we going to do that? This is so 2 to the 4th times square root of 7. Okay, and then the square root of 2 to the 4th, that is 2 squared. So then we get x equals 8 plus or minus 4 square root of 7. Right, so then we get two answers. We get x is equal to 8 plus 4 square root of 7 and 8 minus 4 square root of 7. Right. So I didn't label it. This would be step 4, because this is where we apply the square root property and then we solve for x. Right? So let's do one more example, and then we will be done with section 7.1. So example 2, we are given x squared plus 4x minus 6 is equal to 0. So our very first step is we first need to see if there are two numbers that multiply to be a times c and add to be b. So we want to see, are there two numbers that multiply to be negative 6 and add to be 4? So for negative 6, since it's negative, one of our terms have to be negative. So I have negative 1 and 6, negative 2 and 3. And these are all the factors of 6. So negative 1 plus 6, that does not equal 4. negative 2 plus 3, that also doesn't equal 4. So therefore, we cannot factor this nicely. Because we cannot factor it nicely, what does that tell us? We're going to have to complete the square. Okay, so this didn't work, so let's erase it. Okay, so now, let's complete the square. So first thing, I'll put on the side. You guys don't need to write this, but I'm going to do it just to make it clear. So A is 1, B is 4, and C is negative 6. So now the first step is we want to divide both sides by A to make the leading coefficient 1. Again, the leading coefficient is 1, so therefore we don't need to divide both sides by A. Step 2, we want to isolate the variable terms on one side of the equation. So we're just going to add 6 over. Okay, so we get x squared plus 4x is equal to 6. And now we want to complete the square. So we are going to take this b. So off to the side we have 4. We want to divide it by 2, and then we're going to square it. So 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 squared is 4. And so we're going to add 4 to both sides. Right. So now we're going to factor the resulting perfect square trinomial, and this is also a time to check our work. So we want to see, is x squared a perfect square? Yes, it is, because x times x is x squared. And then 4 is also a perfect square because 2 times 2 is 4. And then when I say 2 times x times 2, we get 4x. So this can be factored as a perfect square. And this is equal to 10. Right? So now for the fourth step, so we have a square, our x is inside this squared, and we're not going to expand it. So why? Because that would undo all the work we did up here. And so our goal is to solve for x. So in order to do that, we have to get this out of the square. So to do that, we're going to apply the square root property, and that says that if we take x plus 2 quantity squared equal to 10, this is also the same as x plus 2 equal to plus or minus square root of 10. Right? So again, it doesn't matter how you do this, right? But I guess first you want to see, can you simplify the square root? So if we look at 10, 10 is broken up to 2 times 5, and as you can see, they both have a power of 1. So that means this is as simplified as possible. So that means for 10, it is also as simple as possible. So all we have to do is subtract 2 from both sides. Right, and this is our answer. So x is equal to negative 2 plus or minus square root of 10. That is also saying x is equal to negative 2 plus square root of 10 and negative 2 minus square root of 10. Right, and this completes section 7.1.